My name is Hallie Campos. I am 34 years old, a mother of two, and the daughter-in-law of one of the most prestigious Navy families in Virginia. To the world, I look like just another suburban mom. In the eyes of my father-in-law, Admiral Simon Hawthorne, I am nothing more than a taxi driver in the sky, a civilian nuisance he tolerates for the sake of appearances. But this morning, at the Norfolk Naval Base, standing before 43 high-ranking officers, Admiral Simon, my own father-in-law, decided to break me. He laughed, a cold, echoing sound in the briefing room, and asked, "Tell the officers, Hallie, what is your call sign? Is it Princess Pilot?" The whole room erupted in laughter. He didn't invite me there to observe. He invited me to execute my self-esteem, to prove once and for all that a common woman like me doesn't deserve to step into his world. He wanted me to bow my head in shame, just like I have done for the past 3 years. But he made a fatal mistake. He doesn't know that the woman standing in front of him is actually Valkyrie 77, the only person holding the evidence of a war crime he has buried for 10 years. Tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button right now if you believe that a chest full of medals cannot hide the cowardice in a man's heart. It is time for the truth to be exposed. But before I stood in that cold briefing room, before the public humiliation, there was last night. It started, as most disasters in this family do, with a Sunday roast. The atmosphere in the dining room of the Hawthorne estate in Virginia Beach was always the same, suffocating. The room itself was a testament to old money and naval tradition. The walls were paneled in dark, oppressive oak, hung with oil paintings of ships and stern-faced ancestors who looked like they disapproved of your very existence. We were seated around the long mahogany table. Me, my husband Luke, and at the head, dominating the space like a king on his throne, was Admiral Simon Hawthorne. The only sound in the room was the sharp, aggressive clink and scrape of silver knives against fine bone china. We were eating prime rib, cooked rare, served with mashed potatoes and green beans, the standard American Sunday dinner. But in this house, eating felt less like a meal and more like a tactical maneuver. Simon was in rare form tonight. He was 62, with silver hair cut in a high and tight military style, and he wore his authority like a second skin, even when wearing a cashmere sweater. He hadn't looked at me once since we sat down. "The joint exercises in the Pacific are looking promising, Luke," Simon said, slicing into his beef with surgical precision. "I spoke with the Joint Chiefs yesterday. They need strong leadership in the next quarter. Real leadership. Not this soft administrative nonsense." Luke nodded, taking a sip of his Cabernet. "Yes, sir. The logistics are complicated, but we're handling it." "Logistics?" Simon scoffed, chewing slowly. "War isn't won with spreadsheets, son. It's won with grit, something your generation seems to have lost." I sat there, pushing a green bean around my plate. I was invisible. I was the ghost at the banquet. For 3 years, this had been my life. I was Luke's wife, the mother of his grandchildren, but to Simon, I was just a piece of furniture that occasionally needed to be dusted. I decided to try. Just one more time. I cleared my throat. "Actually," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Speaking of grit, we had a tough flight today at Lifeline." Simon didn't stop chewing. He didn't even blink. I pressed on, gripping my fork tighter. "We had a cardiac transport from the Outer Banks. Severe winds. The patient went into arrest mid-flight, but we managed to stabilize him and get him to Norfolk General in under 20 minutes. The surgeon said we saved his life." I felt a small spark of pride. I loved my job. Flying medical evacuation helicopters wasn't just a job. It was a calling. Simon finally stopped eating. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, deliberately, slowly. Then he looked at Luke, completely bypassing me. "That's quaint, isn't it?" Simon chuckled, a low rumbling sound that lacked any warmth. "Did you hear that, Luke? Your wife had a busy day." He turned his cold blue eyes onto me for the first time that night. "That's wonderful, Hallie, truly. It's good to know my daughter-in-law is such a competent— what is it? A flying Uber driver?" My stomach dropped. The air left my lungs. "It's medical evacuation, Simon," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Right. Medical Uber. He corrected himself, smirking. You pick people up, you drop them off. It's practically the same as delivering pizza, just with a rotor blade. Just make sure you don't expect a tip. He laughed loudly, looking at Luke, waiting for the validation he always demanded. I looked at my husband. I looked at Luke, the man I loved, the father of my children. I waited for him to say something. Anything. She's a pilot, Dad. She saves lives. Respect her. Luke didn't look up. He stared intently at his mashed potatoes. His knuckles were white as he gripped his napkin under the table. He said nothing. The silence from my husband was a physical blow. It hurt more than Simon's mockery. Simon was a bully, I knew that. But Luke was supposed to be my partner. In that moment, watching him cower before his father, I felt a wave of loneliness so profound it almost choked me. Simon, satisfied with his dominance, reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold edging and slid it across the polished wood toward me. It looked like a wedding invitation, but it felt like a subpoena. Open it, he commanded. I picked it up. My fingers felt numb. Inside was an official pass to the Naval Station Norfolk. Tomorrow morning, 0900 hours, Simon said, returning to his steak. I'm hosting a briefing for the new tactical division. I want you to come and audit the session. I frowned, confused. Why? Because, he said, pouring himself more wine. I think it's time you saw what the real military looks like. Maybe if you see how actual officers conduct themselves, you'll understand why we don't consider, whatever it is you do, to be in the same league. He took a sip of wine, his eyes glittering with malice over the rim of the glass. Don't wear your pajamas, Hallie. Try to look the part of a hawthorn, if you can manage it. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons to a public dressing down. He wanted me on his turf, surrounded by his sycophants, so he could remind me exactly how small I was. I have a shift tomorrow, I said quietly. Cancel it, Simon snapped. It wasn't a request. Dinner ended in silence. Later that night, in the privacy of our master bedroom, the tension finally broke. I was taking off my earrings, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I looked tired, not physically, but spiritually. Luke was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. You shouldn't go, Luke whispered. I turned to look at him. He insulted me, Luke. He insulted my work, and you sat there and let him. I know, Luke said, his voice cracking. He looked up, his eyes filled with that familiar, pathetic fear. I know, Hallie, I'm sorry. But you know how he is. If I stand up to him, he makes calls. He talks to my CO. He could derail my promotion. We have the mortgage, the girls' tuition. So the price of our lifestyle is my dignity? I asked. Luke stood up and walked over to me, pleading. Just don't go tomorrow. Call in sick. Tell him you have the flu. If you go there, he's just going to embarrass you. He wants to show off to his staff. Please, Hallie, for me. Don't make a scene. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a man who had been beaten down by his father's shadow for 40 years. He was terrified. He was weak. And God help me, I realized I couldn't rely on him to protect me. I turned back to the mirror. I was wearing a silk nightgown, the kind of thing a dutiful admiral's daughter-in-law wears. But beneath the silk, on my upper left arm, there was a scar. It was faint now, a jagged white line about 3 inches long. Most people thought it was from a childhood biking accident. Luke thought it was from a hiking trip I took before we met. I reached up and traced the line of the scar with my fingertips. The skin felt different there. Tougher, numb. It was a souvenir from a valley in Afghanistan. A reminder of burning metal, screaming rotors, and the smell of blood mixed with jet fuel. It was a reminder of a life I'd buried deep inside a box to become Mrs. Hawthorne. I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. I'm going, Luke, I said softly. Hallie, please. I'm going, I repeated, turning to face him. My voice was steady, void of the emotion he expected. Not because he ordered me to, and not because I want to make him happy. I looked down at the scar on my arm one last time, feeling the ghost of the pilot I used to be stirring inside me. I'm going because it's been long enough, I whispered. It's time I went back and took my name back. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bathroom, the harsh LED lights illuminating every detail. The woman staring back at me looked perfectly harmless. I was wearing a beige pencil skirt and a cream-colored silk blouse, the uniform of a wealthy Virginia housewife. My hair was pulled back into a neat, low bun. I looked like I was ready to host a charity luncheon or attend a PTA meeting. This was the Hallie that Admiral Simon Hawthorne wanted the world to see. Quiet. Decorative. Bland. But I knew what lay beneath the silk and the polite smile. I unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of my blouse and pulled the fabric aside. The scar on my shoulder was jagged and ugly, a souvenir from a piece of shrapnel that had missed my artery by millimeters. Below that, across my ribs, were faint burn marks that had healed but never truly disappeared. My body was a map of violence. It was a history book written in scar tissue. I remembered the day I was honorably discharged. It was supposed to be a proud moment, but Simon had ruined it with a single, dismissive comment over a glass of scotch. It's for the best, really, he had said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Women in combat. It's messy. You come back broken, damaged goods. Honestly, Hallie, ex-military women are just leftovers. Do yourself a favor, go home, wash the dishes, and raise my son's children. Let the men handle the real work. I had swallowed my rage then. I had bitten my tongue until it bled. Why? Because I loved Luke. Because I wanted a family. Because I thought I could leave the war behind. But you never really leave the war behind. Suddenly, the silence of the bathroom was shattered. Not by a noise, but by a memory. It hit me like a physical blow, dragging me back 3 years, back to a valley in Afghanistan. August 2018, the Helmand province. The smell hit me first. The acrid chemical stench of JP-8 jet fuel mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood. The roar of the rotors was deafening, drowning out everything except the screaming. Mayday! Mayday! This is Valkyrie 77. We are taking heavy fire. My hands were steady on the collective, fighting the controls of the Black Hawk as tracers zipped past the canopy like angry hornets. In the back, the medic was shouting something I couldn't hear. And then I saw him. Nathan Hawthorne, Simon's younger brother. A man with the same blue eyes as my father-in-law, but none of the cruelty. He was lying on a stretcher, his flight suit soaked in red. He was gripping my hand so hard I thought he would break my fingers. Hallie! He gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. Don't let him get away with it. Hold on, Nate, I screamed over the comms. We're almost out. Promise me, he choked out, his eyes wide with a terror that wasn't about dying. It was about the truth dying with him. The order. He gave the order. Promise me, Hallie. I promise, I yelled. I promise. He died 3 minutes later. He died holding my hand while I flew us through hell. I snapped back to the present, gripping the edge of the marble sink so hard my knuckles turned white. My breathing was ragged. I had promised him. And for 3 years, I had broken that promise. Why? Because Simon controlled everything. After Nathan's funeral, Simon had cornered me in the kitchen. He knew I knew. He didn't threaten to kill me. He did something worse. You're a mother now, Hallie, he had whispered, his voice dangerously soft. Think about your daughters. Think about Luke's career. If you breathe a word about what happened in that valley, I will bury Luke professionally. And then I'll sue for custody. I have the judges, the lawyers, the money. I will prove you are an unstable, PTSD-ridden veteran unfit to raise children. You will never see those girls again. So I buried the truth. I buried Valkyrie 77. I became the housewife in the beige skirt. But looking at myself now, I realized that the woman in the mirror wasn't protecting her family. She was hiding. I turned away from the mirror and walked into the walk-in closet. I knelt down and pulled up a loose floorboard in the far corner, beneath a stack of shoeboxes. Inside was a small fireproof lockbox. My hands didn't tremble as I dialed in the combination. 0812. The date Nathan died. The lid popped open. There were no diamonds or pearls inside. Instead, resting on black velvet was the distinguished flying cross. The metal was cool to the touch. Next to it was a small leather-bound notebook. The pages were crinkled from water damage and stained with dried blood. Nathan's blood. I ran my thumb over the cover. This was the insurance policy. This was the red sand file. I whispered the words from Psalm 23, the same words I used to whisper before every mission. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I paused. For I am the meanest son of a bitch in the valley. A grim smile touched my lips. That was the Valkyrie version. I took the notebook and the medal. I slipped them into my designer handbag, right next to my lipstick and car keys. It was a heavy weight, but it felt good. It felt like armor. I walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Luke had already left for the base, too coward to face me this morning. In the kitchen, my two daughters, Emma and Sophie, were eating cereal. The nanny was packing their lunches. Emma, my 6-year-old, looked up with milk on her chin. She saw my outfit and frowned. "Mommy, are you going to work?" she asked. "You don't usually wear the fancy shoes to fly the helicopter." I walked over and kissed the top of her head, smelling the sweet scent of strawberry shampoo. My heart ached with love for them. Everything I had done, every lie I had swallowed, was for them. But they didn't need a mother who was afraid. They needed a mother who could stand tall. "No, sweetie," I said, smoothing down her hair. "I'm not going to fly today." "Then where are you going?" Sophie asked. I straightened up and adjusted my collar. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. "I'm going to teach a class," I said softly. "You're a teacher?" Emma giggled. "Just for today," I smiled. "I'm going to teach a very important man a lesson about respect. If you have ever had to stand up to a bully to protect the people you love, or if you believe that a mother's strength is the most powerful force on earth, please hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type, "I am strong," to show that you are with me. Let's show Simon he's outnumbered. I walked out the front door and into the bright Virginia morning. The humid air hit my face, but I didn't flinch. I walked to my car, my heels clicking rhythmically on the driveway like the cadence of a march. I wasn't Hallie Hawthorne, the obedient daughter-in-law, anymore. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. As I turned the ignition, the engine roared to life, sounding not unlike the turbines of a Black Hawk. I was Valkyrie 77, and I was entering the combat zone. Naval Station Norfolk loomed ahead of me like a concrete fortress rising from the tidewater. It was a sprawling beast of gray steel and chain-link fences, the beating heart of the Atlantic Fleet. I had driven through these gates 1,000 times before, back when I wore a flight suit and a rank. Back then, the guards would snap a salute that was crisp enough to cut glass. Today, I was just Mrs. Hallie Hawthorne in a silver Lexus. I pulled up to Gate 5. The young master-at-arms standing guard couldn't have been more than 22. He leaned out of his booth, chewing gum with a slack-jawed rhythm that would have gotten him reprimanded in my unit. I rolled down the window and handed him my ID and the visitor pass Simon had graciously provided. He looked at the pass, then at me. His eyes raked over my silk blouse and designer sunglasses with open amusement. "Visitor pass, huh?" he smirked, handing it back. "Going to see the hubby, ma'am? Or is this a delivery for the Admiral?" I didn't smile. I didn't take off my sunglasses. I just stared at him with the kind of blank predator gaze I used to reserve for interrogations. "Briefing at Building C9, I said, my voice flat. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Right. Well, try not to get lost, okay? The exchange is that way if you're looking for the mall. The operational zones don't have any shoe sales today." He waved me through with a dismissive flick of his wrist, treating me like a lost tourist who had wandered off the boardwalk. I drove forward, my hands loose on the steering wheel. A younger version of me would have corrected him. I would have told him I could strip his M4 carbine blindfolded faster than he could tie his boots. But today, silence was my weapon. Let them underestimate me. It would make the ambush sweeter. I parked in the visitor lot far away from the reserved spaces for the brass. The asphalt radiated heat. As I stepped out, adjusting my skirt, I heard a familiar voice. Hallie! Oh my God, Hallie! I turned to see Sandra Torres hurrying towards me between the rows of parked cars. Sandra was the wife of Commander Luis Torres, one of Simon's most loyal subordinates. She was a nervous, fluttery woman who always looked like she was waiting for bad news. Today, she looked terrified. Sandra, I said, offering a polite nod. Good to see you. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled me behind a large SUV, looking around as if we were doing a drug deal. What are you doing here? She hissed, her eyes wide. Luis told me you were coming, but I didn't think you'd actually show up. Simon invited me, I said calmly. It's not an invitation, Hallie, it's a setup. Sandra's voice trembled. Luis came home last night sick to his stomach. He said the Admiral has been bragging all week about disciplining his daughter-in-law. He's turning this briefing into a spectator sport. He wants to humiliate you in front of the entire command staff. He wants to prove you're just a silly little girl playing dress-up. I looked at Sandra's fearful face. I knew why she was scared. Her husband's career depended on Simon's goodwill. In this world, the Admiral was God, and you didn't cross God. I know, Sandra, I said softly. Then go home, she pleaded. Please, just turn around. Say you got a flat tire. Say one of the girls is sick. Don't let him do this to you. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Does Luis know? I asked. Does he know what Simon is planning? Sandra looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. He knows. But what can he do? It's Admiral Hawthorne. If Luis speaks up, we lose everything. The pension, the housing. We have 3 kids in college, Hallie. I felt a surge of cold anger. Not at Sandra, and not even really at Luis. They were hostages. Simon didn't just command ships, he commanded fear. He held people's livelihoods over their heads like a guillotine blade. I remembered the late-night phone calls Simon would make to our house, drunk on scotch and power. He would berate Luke for hours, calling him weak, calling him whipped because I had a job. He poisoned everything he touched. It's okay, Sandra, I said, smoothing my skirt. You don't have to worry. I'm not here to be a victim. You don't understand, she whispered. He's going to destroy you. Let him try, I said. I left her standing in the parking lot and walked toward the command building. Building C9 was a brutalist structure of concrete and glass. The air conditioning inside was set to Arctic levels. I walked down the long polished hallway, the click-clack of my heels echoing off the linoleum. The walls were lined with the portraits of past admirals, row after row of stern, white men in dress whites staring down with judgment. I felt their eyes on me. You don't belong here, they seemed to say. Go back to the kitchen. 2 young lieutenants were walking toward me, holding coffee cups and laughing. As they got closer, their laughter died down, replaced by smirks. Hey, one of them whispered loudly to the other. Check it out, is that her, the princess pilot the Admiral was talking about? The other one snorted. Must be. Look at the shoes. Probably thinks this is a country club mixer. They passed me, not bothering to lower their voices. They didn't see a person. They saw a punchline. They saw exactly what Simon had told them to see. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the double doors at the end of the hall. My hand tightened around the handle of my leather tote bag. Inside, nestled against my wallet, was the red sand file. It was heavier than paper should be. It carried the weight of 15 dead men. Laugh while you can, boys, I thought, a cold calm settling over me like armor. Enjoy the joke. Because in about 10 minutes, nobody is going to be laughing. I reached the doors. Above them was a sign, Restricted Access. Briefing Room. A. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of floor wax and stale coffee. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the lion's den. I pushed open the heavy double doors of Briefing Room A, and the sound of my entrance was like a gunshot in a library. 43 heads turned. 43 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The room was a sea of crisp white uniforms. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, Old Spice, and unchecked testosterone. At the front of the room, standing on a raised platform like a preacher at a revival, was Admiral Simon Hawthorne. He stopped mid-sentence, his laser pointer hovering over a digital map of the South China Sea. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face as he saw me. It was the smile of a wolf that had just watched a lamb wander into its den. "Ah," Simon said, his voice booming through the room without a microphone. "Right on time." He gestured to a single, metal folding chair set up in the far back corner of the room. It was isolated, separated from the rows of plush leather seats occupied by the officers. It looked like a dunce chair in a 1950s classroom. "Gentlemen," Simon announced, "please welcome Mrs. Hallie Hawthorne. My daughter-in-law has decided to grace us with her presence today to see how the adults run the Navy." A ripple of polite, sycophantic laughter moved through the room. I kept my face blank, my chin high as I walked the gauntlet. I could feel their eyes dissecting me, my heels, my skirt, my purse. To them, I wasn't a person, I was an intruder. I was a civilian disruption in their sacred boys' club. I sat down in the metal chair. It was cold and uncomfortable. I placed my bag on my lap, my fingers brushing against the hidden weight of the red sand file. "Just wait," I told myself. "Just wait." For the next 30 minutes, Simon put on a show. He paced back and forth across the stage using jargon and acronyms. LCS deployment, asymmetrical warfare, kinetic response. Like he was composing a symphony. He was charismatic, I had to give him that. He knew how to hold a room. But I wasn't watching the presentation. I was watching him. I saw the way his hand shook slightly when he reached for his water. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. He was performing, and like all bad actors, he needed an audience to validate him. Suddenly, Simon clicked off the PowerPoint. The screen went black. The room fell silent. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly. Then, he looked directly at me, over the heads of 43 officers. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone. "I'm sure some of this went over your head, Hallie. Strategic logistics can be quite dry compared to... What is it you do? Flying sick retirees to their checkups?" The laughter was louder this time. A few officers turned in their seats to look at me, smirks plastered on their faces. "She works for a private ambulance service," Simon explained to the room, waving a dismissive hand. "She drives a helicopter. It's very noble, I suppose. Like a flying taxi service for people who forgot to take their heart medication." He stepped off the platform and began to walk down the center aisle, moving toward me. The officers parted like the Red Sea, giving him space. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He loomed over me, forcing me to look up at him. "Tell me, Hallie," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are these numbers too complex for your civilian brain? Should I break it down into terms you might understand? Maybe use a cooking analogy, or something about grocery shopping?" My face felt hot. Not from embarrassment, but from a rage so pure it felt like lava in my veins. He wasn't just insulting me, he was insulting every woman who had ever dared to step out of the kitchen. He was reducing my intellect, my experience, my entire existence to a stereotype. I stared at his polished shoes. I didn't speak, not yet. He mistook my silence for submission. He leaned in closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, masked by peppermint. "You see, gentlemen," Simon said, turning his head slightly to address his captive audience. "This is why we have standards. This is why we don't just let anyone wear the uniform. Because when the pressure is on, when the bullets are flying, you need resolve. You don't need someone who is going to worry about a broken nail." He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. He was enjoying this. He was feeding on my humiliation. "Speaking of uniforms," he sneered, "my son tells me you used to play soldier for a few years, before you quit to get married." He paused for effect. Tell the officers, Hallie, he challenged, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. What was your call sign? Every pilot has one. Something fierce, I bet. Was it kitten? Or maybe princess? The room exploded. 43 men laughed openly now. It was a roar of derision. They were laughing at the little housewife playing dress-up. They were laughing because their admiral told them to. That was it. That was the moment the dam broke. The sound of their laughter faded into the background, replaced by the thumping of my own heart. It wasn't a fast, panicked rhythm. It was slow, steady, dangerous. I remembered the valley. I remembered the heat. I remembered the weight of a dead man's hand in mine. I looked up. I didn't blink. I didn't tremble. I looked straight into Simon's cloudy, arrogant blue eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, he saw something in my gaze that made his smile falter. He didn't see Hallie the housewife. He didn't see Luke's wife. He saw the pilot who had flown into a sandstorm when he had ordered everyone else to ground their birds. The laughter in the room began to die down, an uneasy silence spreading from the back to the front as the officers noticed the change in the atmosphere. They noticed that the woman in the corner wasn't crying. She wasn't looking down. She was looking at the admiral like he was a target. I gripped the arms of the metal chair. My knuckles were white. You want a show, Simon? I thought. Fine. Let's give them a show. I took a breath. And then, I stood up. The laughter in the room was beginning to die down, but the echoes of it still hung in the air like smoke. I counted the beats of my own heart. 1, 2, 3. I didn't rush. I didn't scramble. I simply placed my hands on the cold metal back of the folding chair and pushed it aside. Screech! The sound of the metal legs dragging against the linoleum floor was sharp and violent. It cut through the remaining chuckles like a knife. Every head turned back to me. I stood up. I unfolded my body slowly, deliberately. I am 5'9" in my bare feet. Today, in my 3-inch stiletto heels, I was 6 feet tall. I smoothed down the front of my beige skirt, not out of nervousness, but out of preparation. I stepped away from the corner, out of the shadows, and into the center aisle. Simon was still smiling, but the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He looked like a man who had just heard a strange noise in the basement. Do you have something to share with the class, Hallie? He asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Maybe a recipe? I didn't answer him immediately. I just looked at him. I looked at the medals on his chest, rows of colored ribbons that told stories of bravery he had never actually shown. It's not, Princess, I said. My voice was not loud, but it was projected perfectly from the diaphragm, a skill I had learned not in a kitchen, but over the roar of twin-engine turbines. It carried to every corner of the room. Simon frowned. Excuse me? I took a step forward. My heels clicked on the floor, a steady rhythmic beat of approaching doom. My call sign, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. You asked for my call sign, Admiral. It wasn't Princess, and it certainly wasn't Kitten. I stopped 10 feet away from him. The room was now deathly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. My call sign, I stated clearly, is Valkyrie, Valkyrie 77. The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. For a second, nobody moved. Then I saw the recognition dawn on the faces of the older officers in the front row. Their eyes widened. A few of them exchanged frantic, whispered glances. In the back of the room, I heard a sharp clatter. Commander Luis Torres, Sandra's husband, had dropped his pen. He was staring at me, his face draining of all color. His mouth hung open. He knew that name. Every pilot in the Atlantic Fleet knew that name. It was a ghost story. A legend? The pilot who had flown a damaged Black Hawk into a sandstorm in the Helmand province to extract a pinned-down SEAL team when command had ordered an abort. The pilot who was crazy, or fearless, or both. Simon's smile vanished instantly. It was wiped clean off his face, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated fear. His blue eyes darted around the room, gauging the reaction of his men. Simon stammered, his confident boom reduced to a squeak. That's impossible. That's a classified operation. You're lying. Am I? I asked. I took another step forward. Simon took a step back. It was a subtle movement, an instinctual retreat from a superior force. I don't fly tourists, Admiral, I continued, my voice relentless. I don't drive a flying taxi. For 5 years, I flew Black Ops extraction missions that you wouldn't have the stomach to sign off on. I pointed a manicured finger at his chest, right at the center of his uniform. I have logged more combat hours in a hostile zone than you have spent on a golf course, I said. I have pulled men out of burning wreckage while taking AK-47 fire. I have flown with one engine out, bleeding from shrapnel wounds, while my co-pilot screamed in the seat next to me. The young lieutenants who had mocked me in the hallway were now staring at me with slack jaws. The arrogance was gone, replaced by awe and terror. Simon bumped into the edge of the podium. He was cornered. Sit down, he barked, trying to regain control. This is unauthorized. You are a civilian. Sit down or I will have the MPs drag you out. I don't think so, I said calmly. Because if you drag me out, you'll never know what's in my bag. I held up my leather tote. Simon's eyes locked onto it. He knew. Deep down, he knew exactly what was in there. You see, gentlemen, I addressed the room, turning my gaze from Simon to the stunned officers. The Admiral likes to talk about leadership. He likes to talk about tough choices. But there is one choice he made that he never talks about. I turned back to Simon. He was pale, sweating profusely now. August 12, 2018, I said. The Red Sand Valley. Simon flinched as if I had slapped him. That's enough, he screamed. Torres, get her out of here, now! But Torres didn't move. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at me. I was there, Simon, I said, my voice lowering to a whisper that was louder than his shouting. I was in the air. I heard the radio chatter. I heard Alpha 6 screaming for help. And I heard you. I took the final step, closing the distance between us until I was standing right in his face. I could see the pores on his nose. I could smell his fear. I heard you give the order to abandon them, I said. I heard you tell command to leave them to die because the political fallout of a failed extraction would ruin your chances at a promotion. A gasp went through the room. This wasn't just insubordination. This was an accusation of cowardice, of murder. You left them, I hissed. You left 15 men to be slaughtered in that valley, and you did it to save your own career. Simon was trembling now. His hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the podium to steady himself. You have no proof, he whispered, his voice raspy. It's your word against mine, and I am an admiral. No, Simon, I smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was the smile of the Valkyrie coming to claim a soul. It's not just my word. Because I didn't follow your order that day. I went in. I unzipped my bag. The sound of the zipper was the only sound in the universe. And I brought something back. I reached into my bag and pulled out not a weapon, but my iPhone. With a few quick taps, I connected to the secure AirPlay network of the briefing room's AV system. What are you doing? Simon snapped, taking a step toward me. Turn that off. But it was too late. The large screen behind him, which moments ago had displayed strategic maps of the Pacific, flickered and changed. A document appeared. It was redacted in places, thick black lines crossing out sensitive coordinates, but the header was clear as day. After action report, Operation Red Sand, declassified. Look at the screen, gentlemen, I commanded. My voice wasn't asking for permission anymore. 43 heads turned. This is the official log from that day, I said, pointing to the timestamps highlighted in yellow. At 1400 hours, a distress call was received from Alpha 6. They were pinned down in a ravine, taking heavy mortar fire. They requested immediate medevac. I scrolled down on my phone, and the image on the screen moved with it. At 1405, Command, specifically Admiral Hawthorne, who was then Captain Hawthorne, denied the request. The reason given? Inclement weather. A dust storm. I looked at Simon. He was staring at the screen, his face the color of old ash. But here is the satellite data from that same hour. I swiped to the next slide. It showed a clear meteorological map. There was no storm, not yet. Visibility was 5 miles. A murmur went through the room. Officers were exchanging glances. To lie about weather conditions to avoid a mission was cowardice. It was a court-martial offense. Why lie, Simon? I asked softly. Because you were up for promotion that week? Because a botched extraction would have looked bad on your record? Because you didn't want to risk losing a helicopter? It was a tactical decision, Simon yelled, his voice cracking. The intel was bad. It was a trap. No, I cut him off. It wasn't a trap. It was a plea for help. And do you know who made that call? Do you know whose voice was on the radio, begging you to send in the birds? I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was painful. It was Master Sergeant Nathan Hawthorne, I said. Your own brother. The silence in the room shattered. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the space. Several officers stood up, unable to stay seated. You're lying, Simon screamed, lunging toward the podium as if he could physically block the truth. Nathan died instantly. It was an IED. That's what the report says. That's what your report says, I countered, stepping in his path. But Nathan didn't die instantly, and he didn't die alone. I pulled the small, battered leather notebook from my bag. I held it up like a holy relic. I disobeyed your order, Simon. I flew Valkyrie 77 into that ravine under heavy fire. I got them out. Nathan was alive when I pulled him onto the bird. He lived for 2 more years in a VA hospital in Germany, paralyzed from the neck down, unable to speak, unable to move. But he could blink. And he could use a letterboard. I opened the notebook. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting shaky. Transcribed by nurses, letter by letter, over months of agonizing pain. He dictated this to me, I said, my voice trembling for the first time. He wanted you to hear it. I began to read. To my brother Simon. I watched the sky that day. I watched it for 3 hours while my men bled out in the sand. I told them you were coming. I told them my big brother wouldn't leave us. I lied to them. You killed me, Simon. Not with a bullet, but with your silence. You traded 15 lives for a star on your collar. I forgive you because Mom would want me to. But I don't respect you. And I hope, one day, you look in the mirror and see what you really are. I closed the book. And he left a message for me, I added, looking up at Simon, whose eyes were wide and wet with panic. Hallie, don't let the truth die with me. Live the life I couldn't. Be the soldier he pretended to be. I lowered the book. My eyes were dry. I had cried all my tears years ago. You buried him in a closed casket so no one would see the shrapnel wounds that healed wrong, I said. You buried the truth. But you forgot one thing, Admiral. The truth has a nasty habit of crawling its way out of the grave. The room was in chaos. The young lieutenants were whispering furiously. The older officers looked sick. The image of the perfect iron-willed Admiral Hawthorne had crumbled. Standing in his place was a man who had sold his own flesh and blood for a promotion. Simon stumbled back. He hit the podium with a dull thud. He looked small. He looked old. It was complicated, he wheezed, looking around the room for support, for anyone who would meet his eyes. You don't understand the burden of command, the choices. We understand cowardice, I said. If you believe that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost, please hit that like button right now. Let's honor Nathan's memory. And in the comments, I want you to type justice if you think Simon deserves to pay for what he did. Let the world know whose side you are on. Simon looked at me, and then he looked at the screen where his lies were exposed in high definition. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was done. The execution was over. Now came the burial. Simon Hawthorne was a man drowning, and like all drowning men, he flailed wildly for anything that could keep him afloat. She's lying, Simon screamed, his voice cracking into a desperate falsetto. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for a friendly face among the sea of white uniforms. Torres! He bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at the corner of the room. Commander Torres, you were the XO of that mission. Tell them. Tell them she's delusional. Tell them she's making this up to ruin me. The room fell silent again, But this silence was different. It wasn't fearful. It was expectant. Every head turned toward Commander Luis Torres. Luis sat there for a moment, his face pale, his hands gripping his knees. He looked at Simon, the man who had been his mentor, his boss, and his tormentor for a decade. Then he looked at me. In his eyes, I saw 10 years of guilt finally finding an exit. Luis stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately. He reached down and smoothed the front of his uniform, adjusting his ribbons with a precision that bordered on ritualistic. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and looked directly at the Admiral. "She is not delusional, sir," Luis said. His voice was quiet at first, but it gathered strength with every word. "And she is not lying." "Torres, watch your mouth," Simon snarled, sweat dripping down his temples. "Do you know who you are talking to?" "Yes, I do," Luis replied calmly. "I am talking to the man who ordered me to let my friends die." A murmur rippled through the room like electricity. Luis stepped out from behind his chair and walked toward the center aisle, standing beside me. He didn't look at me, but I felt his presence like a shield. "I was on the radio that day," Luis addressed the room, his voice steady now. "I heard the distress call from Alpha 6. It was clear, there was no static. And I heard Admiral Hawthorne, then Captain Hawthorne, reply. I heard him say, 'Leave them, it's too risky. Abort the rescue.'" He turned to look at Simon, his expression filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I stood by and did nothing," Luis admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I was afraid. I was afraid of you, Simon. I was afraid for my career. I let fear make me a coward." He looked at me then, and tears welled up in his eyes. "But Mrs. Hawthorne, Hallie, she didn't hesitate. She stole a bird. She flew into a dust storm with zero visibility. When she landed back at base, her chopper was so full of holes it looked like Swiss cheese. But she brought them home. She brought me home. I was in the back of that bird, bleeding out. If it wasn't for her, my wife would be a widow and my children would be orphans." "You're fired," Simon screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You're relieved of duty, Torres. Get out." But before anyone could move, another figure stood up. It was Lieutenant Williams, Simon's personal aide. He was young, barely 25, with a face that usually looked eager to please. Today, it looked hard as stone. He walked to the front of the room, carrying a manila folder. He placed it gently on the table, in front of Simon. "Lieutenant?" Simon gasped, looking betrayed. "What are you doing?" "This morning, at 0700, Williams said, his voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "Admiral Hawthorne ordered me to shred the physical archives of Operation Red Sand. He told me it was administrative cleanup." Williams tapped the folder. "I didn't shred them, sir," he said. "I scanned them. And 10 minutes ago, while Mrs. Hawthorne was speaking, I emailed the digital copies to the Inspector General of the Pentagon and to the Washington Post." Simon looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. You traitor," Simon whispered. "After everything I've done for you." "My father was a Marine, sir," Williams said, standing tall. "He taught me that an officer's loyalty is to the Constitution and to the truth, not to a man, and certainly not to a coward." The dam broke. It started with a captain in the second row. He stood up, then a major in the third row, then 2 more. Chairs scraped against the floor. Boots shuffled. One by one, the officers of the Atlantic Fleet stood up. They didn't shout. They didn't attack. They simply stood. They formed a wall. A silent, white wall of solidarity. They were standing with Luis. They were standing with Williams. And most importantly, they were standing with me. Simon looked around, turning in a slow, panicked circle. He was completely alone. The man who had built an empire on fear and intimidation was now isolated in a room full of people. His power evaporated instantly. Without the respect of his men, an admiral is just a man in a costume. He looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, begging for mercy. But he found none. "It's over, Simon," I said softly. The sound of 43 men standing in silent judgment was louder than any scream. The Old Boys Club had just been disbanded. and in its place stood something far more powerful: honor. The silence in the room was broken only by the relentless buzzing of a cell phone. It was Simon's phone, vibrating violently against the polished wood of the podium. Then another phone went off in the back of the room. Then another. The news cycle moves at the speed of light, and thanks to Lieutenant Williams, the story of Admiral Simon Hawthorne's betrayal was already hitting the inboxes of every major news outlet in Washington, D.C. Simon stared at his phone as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't answer it. He knew who was calling: the Secretary of the Navy. The press? The end of his world. He looked up slowly. His face, usually flushed with arrogance, was now a ghostly shade of gray. The sweat on his forehead had turned cold. His hands that had signed thousands of orders, hands that had sent men to their deaths with a stroke of a pen, were trembling uncontrollably. He looked at the wall of officers standing against him. Then he looked at me. "You won!" he rasped. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its booming authority. It sounded like dry leaves scraping against pavement. "Are you happy, Hallie? You destroyed the family name. You won." I didn't blink. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this victory, only a heavy, solemn sense of correction, like setting a broken bone. "No, Simon," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly across the distance between us. "I didn't win. Justice won. And you didn't lose today. You lost 10 years ago. You lost the moment you decided that your career was worth more than your brother's life." Simon flinched. He looked down at his chest. His white dress uniform was immaculate, adorned with rows of colorful ribbons and shining medals. It was a tapestry of honors: the Bronze Star for valor, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, the Legion of Merit. For decades, these pieces of metal had been his armor. They were his identity. They told the world he was a hero, a leader, a man of substance. But now, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of the truth, they looked like what they really were: costume jewelry, shiny trinkets pinned to the chest of a fraud. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Simon reached up to his left breast pocket. The room watched in breathless fascination. It was like watching a monument crumble in slow motion. He unpinned the Bronze Star. He held it in his palm for a second, staring at it. Perhaps he was remembering the lie he had told to get it. Then, he let it drop. Clink. The sound of the heavy metal hitting the wooden podium was loud. It sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block, a final judgment. Next, he reached for the Purple Heart. He struggled with the clasp, his fingers fumbling. When it finally came loose, he didn't look at it. He just let it fall. Clatter. One by one, he began to dismantle himself. The Navy Commendation Medal, clink. The National Defense Service Medal, clatter. The Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, thud. He was stripping away the layers of his persona. With every medal that hit the wood, he looked smaller. The uniform, once tailored to perfection, seemed to hang loosely on his frame. He was deflating right before our eyes. The pile of metal on the podium grew, a heap of gold and bronze and silver that now meant absolutely nothing. They were just scrap metal. They were lies cast in brass. Finally, his chest was bare. The white fabric of his uniform was punctured with tiny holes where the pins had been, leaving behind a ghost outline of his former glory. He stood there, stripped of his honors, stripped of his rank in the eyes of his men. He was no longer Admiral Hawthorne, he was just Simon, a lonely, bitter old man who had traded his soul for a seat at the table only to have the chair pulled out from under him. He looked up at me one last time. The malice was gone from his eyes. The condescension was gone. In their place was a profound, terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a man who realizes too late that he has built his castle on sand. He took a step toward me, then stopped. He seemed to want to say something to defend himself, but the words died in his throat. "You," he started, his voice barely a whisper. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You are the soldier I pretended to be." It was the only honest thing he had said all day. He turned away from me. He turned away from his officers, from the screen showing his crimes, from the pile of discarded medals. He walked toward the side door. His gait was shuffling, uneven. He didn't march. He didn't stride. He limped away into the shadows of the hallway, a ghost fading into oblivion. The door clicked shut behind him, and just like that, the reign of Admiral Simon Hawthorne was over. The room remained silent for a long moment, the air heavy with the gravity of what we had just witnessed. We had watched a titan fall. We had watched a career die. But in the quiet aftermath, I felt something else rising. Not triumph, not gloating. Peace. The kind of peace that comes after a long, violent storm has finally blown itself out. Nathan could rest now. The truth was out. The debt was paid. I looked at the pile of medals on the podium one last time. Then I turned my back on them. I didn't need medals. I had my scars. And unlike his, mine were real. The heavy double doors swung open again. But this time, the person who burst through wasn't an admiral. It wasn't an MP. It was Luke. My husband stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his face flushed with exertion. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing faded jeans and a gray t-shirt, his hair a mess, looking like he had just run a marathon. He scanned the room wildly. He saw the empty podium where his father had stood. He saw the pile of discarded medals. And then, he saw me. "Hallie," he choked out. He didn't walk. He ran. He sprinted down the center aisle, ignoring the 43 high-ranking officers watching him. He ignored protocol. He ignored decorum. He crashed into me, wrapping his arms around me so tight I lost my breath. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, and I felt his body shaking. I saw him leave. Luke gasped into my hair. I saw him in the parking lot. He looked. God, Hallie, I thought I was too late. I stood there for a second, my arms stiff at my sides. Part of me, the Valkyrie part, wanted to push him away. Where were you last night? I wanted to ask. Where were you when he called me a taxi driver? But then I felt the wetness of his tears on my skin. I heard the raw, unfiltered pain in his voice. I'm sorry, he sobbed, oblivious to the audience. I am so sorry. I was a coward. I let him hurt you because I was scared of him. I've been scared of him my whole life. I slowly lifted my arms and wrapped them around his back. He felt solid, real. Not the paper-thin version of a husband he had been at dinner, but a man finally breaking out of a cage. It's okay, I whispered. I handled it. Luke pulled back slightly to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, but there was a fierce new light in them. I quit, he said. I blinked. What? I went to my CEO's office this morning, Luke said, his voice gaining strength. I submitted my letter of resignation, effective immediately. I told them I couldn't serve under a command that doesn't respect my wife. I told them everything. My heart skipped a beat. Luke loved the Navy. It was all he had ever known. Luke, I said softly, your career, the pension. Screw the pension, he said, shaking his head violently. I don't want it. Not if it means losing you. Not if it means becoming him. He looked over my shoulder at the empty podium. I spent 40 years trying to be the son he wanted, Luke said, his voice trembling with emotion. Today I decided to be the husband you deserve. A warmth spread through my chest, melting the last remnants of the icy armor I had worn into this room. This was the victory I hadn't expected. Defeating Simon was justice. But getting Luke back? That was a miracle. We're free, Luke, I whispered, cupping his face in my hands. We're finally free. He kissed my forehead, a tender, lingering kiss that felt like a promise. Around us, the room began to stir. The officers who had been watching this intimate reunion with respectful silence began to move. Commander Torres was the first to approach. He walked up to us, his eyes dry now, but his expression solemn. He extended a hand, not to Luke, but to me. Ma'am, he said. Then he corrected himself. Major. I looked at him, surprised. I hadn't been addressed by my rank in 3 years. Major Campos, Torres said, using my maiden name, my service name. It was an honor to fly with you, and it was an honor to witness this today. He shook my hand firmly. It wasn't the handshake of a man greeting a superior's wife. It was the handshake of a soldier greeting a comrade. Then Lieutenant Williams stepped forward. Major, the young aide said, offering a crisp, perfect salute. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like. One by one, they came. Captains, majors, lieutenant commanders. Men who had laughed at me 30 minutes ago were now lining up to shake my hand. They didn't see a housewife in a skirt anymore. They saw Valkyrie 77. Hell of a flight record, Major, one old captain grunted with a nod of respect. My son is a pilot, another said. I hope he has half your guts. I stood there, holding Luke's hand, surrounded by a sea of white uniforms that no longer felt hostile. The air in the room had changed. The toxicity was gone, flushed out by the truth. I looked at Luke. He was smiling at me, a genuine, proud smile. He wasn't looking at me like I was a problem to be managed. He was looking at me like I was a hero. Let's go home, he said softly. Not yet, I smiled, squeezing his hand. I think I have one more stop to make. Where? The airfield, I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. Valkyrie has been grounded for too long. We walked out of the briefing room together, hand in hand. We left behind the metal chair in the corner. We left behind the ghost of Simon Hawthorne, and as we stepped out into the bright, hot Virginia sun, I realized that I hadn't just taken back my name, I had taken back my life. 6 months have passed since the briefing room doors closed on Admiral Simon Hawthorne's career. The fallout was spectacular. As expected, the press had a field day. But in the end, Simon didn't go to prison. He wasn't court-martialed and stripped of his rank in disgrace. Why? Because I asked for leniency. I didn't do it for him. I did it for the Navy, and mostly, I did it because I knew there was a punishment far worse than a jail cell. Simon is now a guest lecturer at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. He teaches a single course, Ethics in Command. Every morning, at 0800 hours, he has to stand in front of a lecture hall filled with bright-eyed, idealistic midshipmen. He has to look them in the eye and tell them the story of Operation Red Sand. He has to tell them, in excruciating detail, how he chose a promotion over his brother's life. He has to dissect his own cowardice, day after day, as a warning of what not to become. It is a purgatory of his own making. He's forced to live with his shame, publicly and repeatedly. It is the cruelest, most just punishment I could imagine. And honestly, I don't think about him much anymore. I have better things to do. I am standing on the tarmac of the private airfield used by Lifeline Aviation. The Virginia sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, stretching out forever. The wind whips my hair across my face, smelling of ozone and freedom. In front of me sits my new bird. It's a Sikorsky S-76, sleek and powerful, gleaming in the sunlight. But it's not just a standard medical chopper anymore. On the nose of the fuselage, painted in bold, defiant crimson script, is a new logo, Valkyrie. Below it, in smaller letters, is the motto of my new unit, so others may live. I run my hand along the cool metal of the fuselage. No more hiding, no more secret lockboxes under floorboards. The name I earned in blood is now painted for the whole world to see. Mommy, look at me! I turn to see Emma and Sophie running across the grass near the hangar. Luke is chasing them, laughing, his arms outstretched like an airplane. He looks younger. The lines of stress that used to etch his forehead have softened. He's working as a consultant for a veterans advocacy group now. He makes half the money he used to, and he has never been happier. Emma runs up to me, breathless, pointing a small finger at the red logo on the helicopter. That's you, right, Mommy? She asks, her eyes wide with wonder. You're the Valkyrie, like the superhero? I kneel down in the grass so I'm eye level with her. I brush a stray lock of hair from her face. I'm not a superhero, baby, I say softly. Superheroes are made up. I'm just a person. But Daddy said you saved everyone, she insists. He said you flew into the storm when everyone else was scared. I look over at Luke, who is standing a few feet away, watching us with a look of pure adoration. He nods at me. Daddy is right about the storm. I smile at my daughter. But you know what the secret is? It's not about not being scared. Everyone gets scared. Being brave means you saddle up and fly anyway. I want to be a Valkyrie when I grow up, Sophie chirps, tugging on my sleeve. You can be whatever you want, I tell them, pulling them both into a hug. You can be the president. You can be a scientist. You can be a pilot. Just never let anyone tell you to sit in the corner. Okay? Okay, they chorus. I stand up and put on my aviator sunglasses. It's time. The patient transfer is scheduled for 1400 in DC. I walk toward the cockpit. My flight suit fits perfectly. I climb in and begin the pre-flight sequence. The switches click under my fingers with a familiar, comforting rhythm. Battery on. Fuel pumps on. Ignition. The twin engines whine to life, the rotors above me starting their slow, heavy turn before blurring into a whoosh of power. The helicopter shudders, eager to be airborne. As I wait for the temperature gauges to green up, I think of a quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Simon used to quote Roosevelt all the time, but he only ever understood the words, not the meaning. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I grip the collective. I feel the vibration of the machine in my bones. Man in the arena? I think, with a smirk. Move over, Teddy. This arena belongs to the woman. The woman who was told to be quiet. The woman who was told she was just a driver. The woman who was told she was broken. I key the mic. Tower, this is Valkyrie 77, requesting departure to the north, I say, my voice steady and clear. Valkyrie 77, Tower. You are cleared for takeoff. Good to have you back in the sky, ma'am. Good to be back, I reply. I pull up on the collective. The ground falls away. The shadow of the helicopter shrinks as we rise. The houses, the naval base, the old oak-paneled dining rooms, they all become small, insignificant specks below me. I am Hallie. I am a mother. I am a wife. But up here, above the noise and the lies, I am simply Valkyrie. And the sky is mine. Wheels up. This story isn't just about a pilot or a corrupt admiral. It is a reminder that the labels people place on us do not define our worth. We all have a Simon in our lives, someone who tries to make us feel small, who mistakes our silence for weakness, or who judges us by our job title rather than our character. But Hallie taught us that true power doesn't come from a uniform, a rank, or the approval of others. It comes from knowing exactly who you are when the storm hits. Your scars, your struggles, and your sacrifices are not things to be ashamed of. They are your armor. Never let anyone else hold the pen that writes your life story. You're the only one who gets to decide when you fly. Now, I want to turn the microphone over to you. We have all faced moments where we had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking our truth. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family or silenced by someone in power? How did you find the courage to take your name back? Please share your story in the comments below. This is a safe space, and your experience might be the exact inspiration someone else needs to read today. If Hallie's journey touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with a strong woman in your life who needs to be reminded of her own power. Until next time, keep flying.